Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a minute since my last upload. I've had some changes at work and we're getting really close to our wedding now, so it's been a bit busy. No promises on that improving very much in the next few months, but I think after the wedding I'll have more time to make this part of my routine instead of something that I'm just doing when I have time. Because I really do enjoy externalizing my reading a little bit. Reading can be so solitary and I enjoy the process of synthesizing my thoughts in this way. So that's that. This video is about Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And with this video, that completes me making videos of the 6 complete major Jane Austen novels. So this was published at the same time as Persuasion. I kind of wish I had read Persuasion last because that's the one that does feel like the culmination of Austen's maturity as a writer. Because while Northanger Abbey was published at the same time as Persuasion, it was written many years earlier, before Mansfield Park and Emma, I believe. Yeah, there were 13 years between completing this novel and the first time Austen tried to publish it to the time when it is actually published. And there's a little note at the beginning of the novel about that, how this is a reflection of the world as it was 13 years before. And Northanger Abbey kind of stands apart from the other Austen novels because it is a satire and is trying to do something a little bit different as a novel. It's a satire of the sort of common popular style of novel of that time, the gothic novel, of which our heroine, Catherine Morland, is a fan. So it's interesting to read this one because it does have a lot more of that meta-narrative that contributes to the satire, and I think also gives us a lot of insight into how Austen sees herself fitting into the literary tradition, what she's trying to do, what she's trying to accomplish with the rest of her novels. I definitely think we get a lot of like direct discussion of writer's philosophy in Northanger Abbey. And as far as it as a satire, Northanger Abbey of all the Austen novels is definitely by far the one that I have reread the least. I don't think I had actually read it since I was an undergrad, so it's been a while for me on this book. But I definitely found it on this reading to be less of a sort of denouncement of the Gothic novel. I think the overall point is a little more nuanced than that. I was certainly guided by the introduction in this edition in that direction a bit. And I do think I have underestimated Catherine Morland as a main character in the past. I think she goes through a lot of genuine growth, which I've said in several of the Austen videos. That's like what I like to see from the heroines in these books, that all my favorite ones are the ones who have a real reason and need to change and kind of go through that process throughout the novel. So let's go ahead and talk about Catherine Morland as a character. Like I said, I do think in previous readings when I was younger, I underestimated her a lot and kind of just thought Catherine was dumb. But Catherine's not unintelligent by any means. She is naive and overly trusting and just sort of generally inexperienced with the world, not unlike any other 19-year-old. And that's where Catherine begins, leaving home for the first time without the protection of her parents, going to Bath, being exposed to people outside of the neighborhood she grew up in. But she does have strong principles and she's not completely spineless about them. We do see her kind of stick up for what she believes to be right and wrong in this book. She's kind of a character who's ready and willing to be guided by her superiors. So it's whose hands will Catherine fall into? You know, she's open, she lacks artifice. She says what she means and she assumes everyone else is also saying what they mean. And she's ready to learn, which kind of forms the essential dynamic of her and her romantic interest in this book. I mean, her first notion is to very sincerely believe in others and believe what they're saying. But we do see Catherine having some good natural instincts emerge throughout the book, particularly instincts about General Tilney, who we will talk more about. And it's kind of her learning to trust those instincts and follow their guide appropriately. So like not to extremes, not letting sort of the imagination and fancy of the Gothic novels to carry her completely away, but to still trust those instincts that she has. And her journey is so much about gaining experience in the world, gaining wisdom. So if Catherine Morland is kind of looking for the right hands to fall into, the Tilney siblings that we meet, Henry and Eleanor, are kind of the perfect hands for her. They have another brother who is not quite such a good influence, and obviously not their father. Yeah, Henry Tilney is the romantic love interest, the hero of this story. You know, the titles of heroine and hero do take on special meaning when we're talking about a satire of the high drama and the tropes of a Gothic novel. So Henry is very taken with Catherine right away. He's taken with her openness and her trustingness and her kind of lack of artifice. And, you know, there's nothing very cynical about Catherine. She's not trying to gain from anyone else. She kind of stands alone in her honesty, especially in Bath when it seems like there are so many social climbers that she's surrounded by. You know, so we see very early in their relationship that Henry's very interested in Catherine. He seeks her out. We see the signs of his feelings far before Catherine does. She sort of thinks herself unworthy of it for a while. It's kind of like a fantasy in her mind, this Henry Tilney, but she doesn't let herself believe that anything could come of it, and she doesn't see those signs. Again, she's very naive. She is probably not in a position at the beginning of this book to be able to read that in a man. But I don't know, I feel like, I mean, it's been so long, I didn't have such a lasting impression of Henry from my previous readings of Northanger Abbey. But I found him very playful and charming. He is a pretty good romantic interest in this book. You know, he's very clever. He's often joking with her and speaking ironically, and Catherine is very literal, so she doesn't get most of it, which kind of increases the enjoyment for Henry. I feel like from my previous readings, I only remembered him being kind of pedantic, but there's not too much of that. You know, he kind of lectures her with the first reveal of Catherine's imaginings about what's going on at Northanger Abbey. But otherwise, he's pretty fun. He gets like a good big hero moment at the end. And they do have this like student-teacher vibe between them, which, you know, seems to increase the love on both sides. There's this whole scene where Austen gets into this kind of external discussion where Catherine's saying, oh, she doesn't know anything about landscapes and painting. She doesn't know anything about like what makes a good landscape. And, you know, Henry sort of jumps at the opportunity to teach her and kind of guide her taste. And Austen kind of makes the comment that having, you know, a ready mind that can learn, but being a little ignorant is kind of a good place to be in this scenario, because Henry sort of discerns all the good things in Catherine's response to being taught about landscapes. Yeah, the whole sort of lecture-y thing when Catherine thinks that his father is a murderer, obviously that was silly and she shouldn't have taken it that far. But I don't think it's entirely fair to be that mad at her when her instincts were definitely telling her something was off, and clearly something is off. You know, General Tilney is kind of our essential villain of this book, and he does do some pretty despicable things. And you know, as Catherine, you know, goes to Northanger Abbey and gets closer with the Tilneys, we've seen a lot of her development already from her experiences in Bath with the Thorpes, who I'll talk a little bit more about, where she's kind of learning to be a little less trusting and a little more wise. So she's kind of already keyed into that a little bit more, and she just has a bad feeling about General Tilney, which is confusing to her because he has all the appearance of being, you know, a fine English gentleman. He says a lot of the right things, and, you know, Catherine tends to take things very literally. So if he's saying the right things, he must be doing the right things. But in the unsaid things, she starts to get bad feelings, and that's what kind of takes her down this whole crazy path of thinking that he murdered his wife. Obviously influenced by the highly dramatized novels that she's reading. But she is kind of right about General Tilney. He appears to be the gentleman, but he is very much obsessed with wealth. That's all he cares about, and it completely determines how he treats people. He really only treats people well if he thinks he can benefit from them financially in some way, or that being associated with them will sort of boost his pride and ego about wealth. And obviously, when he finds out that Catherine is not as wealthy as he believes earlier in the novel, he treats her, you know, terribly, definitely outside of the code of what a gentleman should do for a lady, no matter what the circumstances are. And then Catherine also finds a companion in Eleanor Tilney, Henry's sister, who's kind of the ideal and in opposition to Isabella Thorpe, who's kind of like the bad friend that Catherine falls in with. But Eleanor, you know, because of the loss of her mother and, you know, living with her father, she has a bit more of that wisdom and experience that Catherine can certainly learn from. And Eleanor, I think, you know, things end up okay, but she is sort of a sad, lonely figure in this book, you know, because she is a young, unmarried woman. She is still in that house with her father, who can't really be a satisfactory companion for her, and her brothers have careers and lives of their own outside of that household. So she does seem very lonely. So she really latches on to Catherine entering the family circle and just being another person she can connect with. So let's talk about Catherine's first companions in Bath, the Thorpe family, who are very much in direct contrast with the Tilneys. So there's Mr. Tilney and Isabella are the characters we primarily interact with. They are brother and sister. So if the Tilneys are like the good and right hands for Catherine Morland to fall into, the Thorpes are the opposite, certainly corrupting influences, not very principled, and are certainly not straightforward people who say what they mean, which, you know, it's kind of what Catherine's learning here. And for a time, Catherine is sort of taken in, not really by Mr. Tilney, she kind of never really likes him, but certainly with Isabella, she considers her a friend and a companion, and she believes the story Isabella is, you know, spinning long after the reader like sees Isabella for who she is, which is basically upon introduction. And sort of accepting who Isabella is and learning her true character and coming to understand that Isabella never really meant anything she said. That's kind of the hardest test for Catherine in unlearning her sort of natural trust and gaining that experience. I think it's even more impactful than, learning the truth of General Tilney's character, because she always felt kind of uneasy with General Tilney. She always felt that the family dynamic was strange. She was never comfortable with him, but she, loved and respected Isabella and was excited at the prospect of Isabella being part of her family when she was engaged to Catherine's brother. So she was like really fully duped by Isabella. Yeah, these are people who are not transparent about their actual motives. They say things for selfish reasons that have very little to do with the truth. They're always flattering their own vanity. You kind of learn quickly you can't really believe anything these two characters say. And to Catherine's credit, she sees that in Mr. Thorpe right away. You really can't take anything these two say at face value. And in the kind of absurdity of these two characters is where a lot of that Austen humor comes in. We see Mr. Thorpe really exaggerating and kind of telling tall tales to suit his own whims and vanities of the moment. When he wants the world to think that he's courting Catherine Morland and she's going to be some great conquest, he lies and exaggerates about all of this wealth that Catherine has, which leads to the essential misunderstanding with General Tilney. And then when he's finally realized that Catherine Morland has no interest in him at all, and he wants to sort of feign like he never cared and all of that she was never a great prospect, then he really over-exaggerates her poverty and inconsequence in society. And while it takes Catherine a little longer to get there, we can see early on that Isabella is silly and careless and selfish. She's kind of irresponsible with the feelings of others and kind of just wants her vanity flattered, and she wants to get attention, and she wants to marry into money. So her kind of need for attention and being wanted, I think, is what gets her engaged to Catherine Morland's brother. But when a prospect with more money comes along, she's pretty willing to cast him aside, even without like a clear promise from Captain Tilney, who is Henry's brother, who kind of flirts and tempts Isabella away. She kind of like sinks herself in society with this choice. Not a good look to break an engagement that way. Yeah, we get a lot of humor out of them. And it's very much in contrast to the Tilneys, who are open and honest at all times. So let's talk about Bath, the watering hole that Austen herself had a good amount of experience in. Really, the majority of this book happens in Bath. A very small portion is actually at Northanger Abbey. The character of Bath in this story is very interesting. This is kind of Catherine's first exposure to the larger world beyond the one of her childhood. And people are kind of just, leisuring away there. A lot of the things that go on in Bath are kind of frivolous and silly. And in order to sort of have a good time and make the most of Bath, you definitely need acquaintances to pal around with, which can kind of force you into some bad connections, which is what kind of happens with the Thorpes. They're the only connections that Catherine's escorts, the Allens, know in Bath, and then they just end up together all the time. But despite that evil, Bath does bring Catherine in contact with the Tilneys and Henry, and sort of puts her on that much better path. So there does seem to be a need for a discerning eye going into Bath, something that Catherine definitely finishes the novel with. And with the good sense to understand how excellent Henry and Eleanor are and what good company they are, once Catherine leaves Bath with them to go to Northanger Abbey, she doesn't look back on Bath with any sort of longings or regrets at all. She's not going to miss that world or the Thorpes who weren't adding to her life in a positive way. So let's talk about the Gothic novel satire of it all. So at this time, novels in general were rising in popularity, the Gothic novel certainly being very popular. These are not books sort of based in realism. They're high drama. There are certainly some tropes associated with the Gothic novel. There's a lot of fantasy involved in it. And they're fun reads. They're sort of like the Pulp Fiction of the time. Anne Radcliffe is a Gothic novelist that we hear a lot about in this book. The novel that Catherine is most recently reading is a real novel, The Mysteries of Udolpho, which I'm very curious to read. After finishing this book, I feel like that will add some good context here. But that's one example that is mentioned a lot among the characters, several of whom have read it. And certainly a little of that context of what everyone was reading at the time is lost on modern readers. But the insight this novel gives to Austen's reactions to that mode of writing, and what she decided was her subject matter and her style. It's very interesting, and I think we certainly see her carrying those principles in her other novels. She's not sort of following that popular path. Her goal is to write about real people in real possible scenarios. She's writing about sort of common life for the class that she was living in. And she very much avoids drama. I mean, certainly some dramatic things happen in the plot of some of our Austen novels, but she's never a writer who wants to linger there. She doesn't want to be sensational. And when I was younger in earlier readings, I assumed, Austen taking that stance, I assumed it as a more simple denouncement of these crazy Gothic novels, like she was disapproving of it more than I actually think there is evidence for in this book. Obviously, she's actively choosing to not write that way, but I think that there's an acknowledgement in this book that novels and Gothic novels are written by women and popular with female leaders, at least ascribed to be popular with female readers, and that maybe some of the detestment that scholars were giving to Gothic novels at the time is coming more from that than their actual merit as works of literature. I do feel she leaves room for both styles to exist and acknowledges kind of a significant contribution of these Gothic novelists like Anne Radcliffe. There's space in the literary world for the high drama and the drama of the everyday. And she does very explicitly praise Gothic novels for their conveyance of human emotion amidst these sort of wild scenarios. She's choosing to do something else by pursuing writing about common feelings. I think that's a phrase that's used in this book. But a lot of the critique of this very popular writing comes down to it being kind of feminine and centering women characters in the stories. There's discussion from our, honest, straightforward Henry Tilney about how so many young men of his acquaintance read the novels, enjoy them, devour them, just like the young women do, but deny that they've ever read a novel before, and they would never read something so unserious. But Henry, being a more open person who doesn't like that kind of artifice, says, yes, I've read these novels. I read Mysteries of Udolpho in like one sitting. I think Austen certainly makes room for reading that is enjoyable and pulls you in like that. She doesn't turn up her nose at it, and I don't think she is at all aligning herself with sort of the academic critics of the popular Gothic novel that were denouncing this kind of writing as like sort of poisoning the mind at the time. The tone of the satire is much lighter than that. It's picking fun at the tropes, but it's clear that Austen's reading Gothic novels if she's making these conclusions. And a lot of the meta discussions of what would be happening if this were a Gothic novel versus what's actually happening in the plot, because this is a plot more based on the real world. That's adding a lot of the humor and the meta discussion of this novel. Like Catherine Morland, introduced as a heroine, probably isn't a very good one for a Gothic novel because she's not like sickly or tragically beautiful, or she hasn't been like victimized her whole life. She's not like a sad orphan. She's kind of normal. So that's a lot of what the satire part of this novel is about, is what would be happening if this were a Gothic novel versus what's actually happening. Henry kind of plays with this a lot when they're on their way to Northanger Abbey, and kind of like describing this decrepit, haunted, spooky-looking castle that Catherine's kind of fantasizing about being in, and then the reality of this is like a modern home. So I actually really enjoyed the progress of Henry and Catherine's relationship and their courtship, and while Catherine can be kind of oblivious for aspects of it, it's nice to see Henry getting to know Catherine and learning more about her and kind of having this gradual falling in love. And the whole dynamic is pretty playful, which is a little contrary to Catherine's literal nature. I think she often doesn't know what to make with the things Henry says and his kind of joking, ironic tone. But he seems to actually like respect her and her interests. She loves these Gothic novels, and he's like, I love them too. I think, people are too quick to judge and critique about these things. They do have this like nice kind of sweet dynamic that you see develop over the course of the novel. The whole aspect of like the teachability of a woman probably doesn't translate to a modern relationship. But I think what's made clear in their dynamic is that Catherine is ignorant about a lot of things, yes, but she's not dumb by any means. So I think the idea is that she is growing and maturing into a good match for someone like Henry. So yeah, Catherine goes through a lot of character development. If I make sort of a big video about all the Austen novels, having actual character development is very important to me in my ranking of these heroines. I like them to be imperfect. I like to see internal change and their world and the people around them affecting them and ultimately making them better, more fully formed, more adult in Catherine's case. A lot more changes for Catherine than getting married and the external circumstances that come along with that. She changes herself, and that change was happening whether she and Henry were to get married or not. She has to become more worldly. She has to become wiser, if she's going to kind of survive this greater world outside of her childhood community. And, finding the balance of having that wisdom and having that discernment about other people's motives with you while still being, open in the way that Catherine is, while maintaining that kind of core of herself. Inexperience is a pretty easy fault to forgive for a character her age. And we see her really reckon with her wrong conclusions. She really agonizes over them, probably punishes herself way more than anyone else would punish her for. And she does have gut instincts, and it's just sort of learning to follow them in a reasonable way. And we see moments of this throughout her development. Really, it's on behalf of the Tilneys that we see her first big pushback against the Thorpes, when she sort of has an engagement to spend the day with the Tilneys, and the Thorpes lie and break it on her behalf, and she knows that's wrong, and she really takes a hard stance and a hard line with that. She says in this kind of heated moment with them, "It does not signify talking. If I could not be persuaded into doing what I thought wrong, I will never be tricked into it." Which shows a lot of fortitude for Catherine at this point in the novel, and shows her putting more effort into doing what is right than even her brother, who's, supposed to be more educated and worldly than her. Even the influence of those closest in her circle at that time is not enough to make her do the wrong thing, which is certainly saying something for a 19-year-old leaving home for the first time. And she does sort of protect herself in a way with General Tilney, because from the very beginning, she doesn't feel at ease with him. She knows something's kind of off about the way he's treating her, even though externally he appears to be treating her very well at the time when he thinks she has a lot of money. And, there's some healthy amount of protection in that, even though, she kind of lets her mind wander down the Gothic novel path of something much more nefarious going on. And we really see the shift, the hard shift, in what I think is the more significant moment for Catherine's internal growth, when she finds out that Isabella has broken her engagement with her brother, is now sort of engaged to Captain Tilney, and to find that someone she thought was her friend had never sort of said a straightforward, honest thing to her once, and wasn't at all a good person. She finally has to acknowledge that there were a lot of inconsistencies in Isabella's words versus her actions. And I think that starts a resolution to not be taken in that way again, and to be guided more by what other people do rather than what they say. And General Tilney's actions at the end of this novel certainly say a lot. When he finds out she's not some kind of heiress, he turns her out pretty despicably, no warning, just kind of forces her out of the house, doesn't even give her like an escort to get back home. It's kind of unsafe. It's definitely, by the social norms, very far from okay to do. Like, anyone who hears about this would think that is so ungentlemanly, like that is, unfitting of his status in society to do that to a young, vulnerable woman who is in his care at this point. That's interesting in this novel. We're critiquing a lot of the things about Gothic novels, or just sort of poking fun at the tropes, but this is a moment of genuine high drama. This is something that feels like it could happen in a Gothic novel. And then Henry's kind of heroic entrance, sort of traveling all that way just to apologize for his father's behavior. Like, that's pretty high drama too. Like, we do get that moment, even though we don't linger there very long, of course. But I think even in this moment, I think Catherine's already undergone the big shifts, and she kind of finds when all of this happens that she's not this helpless creature anymore. Even with him doing this kind of villainous thing to her, she can make her way in the world. Like, she knows what she's about. She's gonna be okay. She's prepared now to face it. She's exiting childhood. You know, he did this horrible thing to her, but she made it home anyways, and, you know, with low drama on her end, besides being very sad about losing the Tilneys, as she thinks she does in that moment. Then, of course, after Henry comes back, the wrap-up is very fast, as it always is in Austen stories. You know, Henry is determined to be with Catherine Morland. He sees her value more than ever after what her dad did. You know, the irony of her dad doing that is that it maybe sort of forced the point of Henry loving Catherine even more. You know, he does get kind of a big romantic gesture there, but you know, this is still within the realm of the real world, and they wait to sort of win General Tilney back over, bring him back into the fold, and get his consent to marry. You know, consent is earned, and they are together on like literally the last page of the book. Like, once things are wrapped up, we don't spend a long time sort of oohing and ahhing about it in any Austen novel. Yeah, so Northanger Abbey is not my favorite Austen. I do think it's kind of dependent on a lot of context that we don't always have as modern readers. And it was written earlier in her career as compared to Persuasion and Emma, which I do consider my favorites. But I got so much more out of it, out of this read. That's what I'm always finding with so many books, especially Austen. There's always more to find upon a reread and a revisit, even with the one that I think I ranked the lowest in my mind. I found this to be a really illuminating read in the context of all of Austen's works. I mean, we learn a lot about her style and the why of Austen's writing in Northanger Abbey. So I'm hoping to make kind of a big video talking about all of these 6 Austen novels kind of in comparison and thinking about what Austen's work is in a larger scale. So maybe I'll get to that at some point. But this is all I have for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.